So first, really quickly, just a little bit about myself. Again, I am Sam Elwell. I went to Forest Hills Northern. I know, I'm sorry. I graduated in 2015 and now am at the University of Michigan, where I'm studying aerospace engineering with a minor in physics. I first got involved with Hyperloop because I heard about this awesome new concept that I wanted to get involved with. And so the second semester of my freshman year, I found out that our university had a team that was a part of OpenLoop, which was actually a partnership of 6 different universities. And I joined that team, and we competed in the first ever Hyperloop pod competition. We then decided to transition away from being a part of OpenLoop and form our own team internally at the University of Michigan as Michigan Hyperloop. So I was one of the 6 founding members of that team. So we saw that video about what Hyperloop is, but I wanted to give you a little bit more details as to what it really is and why it is a little bit more difficult than what Elon Musk might have said. So first thing is that it gives us this incredible ability to go from point A to point B in a very, very short amount of time. In a world that is so fast-paced these days, that is something that is going to be very, very helpful for us. I'm talking things like going from Los Angeles to San Francisco in about 30 minutes instead of taking the 5.5 hours it typically takes to drive. That's not even during rush hour. Then we can do that by traveling at speeds of, like they said in the video, 700 miles per hour. That is the ultimate goal. That is an unbelievably high speed for being on the ground. That's comparable to what aircraft experience at cruising altitude. And the only way that we can do that is by going through an evacuated chamber that essentially simulates those conditions. So I also like to relate it back to something that's a little bit more tangible that you might have had experience with. So who has gone to the bank and seen one of these? Yeah, a fair number of you, right? You go through, you get this little capsule thing, you put your check into it or whatever, it goes over to the teller. They do what they need to, they send it back. Pretty cool things. You don't have to actually go in. It works kind of like that, but not quite the same. And fitting for this time of the year, if you've seen the Polar Express movie, the capsules that the elves use to get around the city really, really quickly is very similar to this concept as well. Again, it just doesn't work exactly the same way. So then actually, how does it work? What allows us to do this? So it's been mentioned a couple times that there's this tube that you're basically putting a bullet train into. What this allows us to do is to reduce the aerodynamic drag by reducing the pressure in the tube to 1/100th of an atmosphere. So we're here at atmosphere, reduce it by 1/100th, and that's what you'd get, and which is very similar to the conditions that you'd experience with an aircraft. Then, to further reduce any kind of resistance that will allow us to hit those speeds with less energy, is some form of levitation. And most of these systems will start off on some kind of wheels and then levitate and reduce that friction even more. The 2 most common forms for this levitation include magnetic levitation and air-bearing levitation. So you might be a little bit more familiar with magnetic levitation because that's what is used on bullet trains, like the ones in Japan that are really, really fast, hitting something like 200, 300 miles per hour. Then air bearings is a little bit more interesting. It's kind of like what Elon Musk was talking about, basically flipping over an air table and generating this blanket of air underneath your system so that you can levitate and then just slide. So does anybody have any questions about specifically what Hyperloop is, how it works, that kind of thing? Sorry.
How long does it take you to actually build it?
That is a great question. We'll take a look more closely at the timeline, but the competition is on a 1-year rotation. So every year a new team is, or a new thing is being built.
Do you guys have to worry about any natural disasters messing with the pipes of that solution?
That would definitely be a concern. Fortunately, there hasn't been anything like that that has been worrisome for us. The tube is still intact. I'm sure they would let us know if there is a problem. In the back.
So if you're reducing the atmospheric conditions inside the tube to be the same as what it would be up at an immense altitude of what, like cruising speed for a jetliner would be, how come you don't stick a jet engine and run it like an air-run a cranoplane or something like that inside?
Yeah, that's a great question. So so your point being that they're up at, or the atmospheric conditions are similar to that of an aircraft. So you've got the potential to use a jet engine, right? The problem is what do you do with that exhaust then? Because now you're burning fuel, and then that's going into your vacuum chamber, right? So the idea is to actually try to use the air that's already in there to, A, help you accelerate with a compressor, but also to use that for levitation.
So then you're just compressing it from so it's sealed inside. It's basically just to the tube, so you're moving the air from it to the front.
Exactly.
Okay,
So in contrast to like those capsules that you would see at the bank, which work with pressure. You have a lower pressure in the front, higher pressure in the back, you get a force. This actually, there's a space around whatever capsule or pod that you actually have, and the propulsion system is completely unique, and there's a lot of talk about potentially using a compressor. The problem is the development of a compressor of that nature hasn't been done yet, which is why a lot of the pods that you'll see have a different form of propulsion, usually an electric motor of some sort. That was a great question.
So is the goal of the Michigan Hyperloop to perhaps at some point build a Hyperloop from Grand Rapids to Detroit?
I would love that. I don't know if that's going to happen or not. It's probably going to be through or between really important big cities. So I'm not saying Detroit and Grand Rapids aren't, but I'm sure that it'll start with things like San Francisco to Los Angeles, New York to DC, those kind of things for the business transit of people that are constantly going between those different places.
So the Michigan Hyperloop is just an extension of the California Hyperloop then?
Yeah, the Michigan Hyperloop it's our team that's competing in a competition that's hosted by SpaceX to try to help develop this technology, because this is something that's never been done before. So even NASA, before this competition was announced, hadn't really done a whole lot of research on what it takes to take a pod like this and shoot it through a tube at these kinds of speeds. It had been done with bullets before with guns, but those work a little bit differently as well. So it's a very interesting project.
Wouldn't you have to worry about someone tampering with it?
That is a concern that people bring up all the time when we talk about this, and that's definitely a possibility. At least with the tube that SpaceX has put together, it's a solid steel tube, so it would take a lot of work to actually mess with that and mess with the vacuum capabilities of it. But I'm sure that once this actually gets implemented, there'll be ways of monitoring the air pressure for sure, and then the infrastructure of the tube as well.
What is it like inside of the train or whatever you're in?
What is it like inside of this?
Yeah.
Like one of those? That is yet to be figured out, because right now we're still so much in the preliminary stages that we're just working on making a pod that goes. So a lot of them have very minimal space, maybe for one dummy or test dummy to go in. And it's at partial vacuum, so we can't put any living thing on it since our systems aren't pressurized. We'll come back to you here in a second. We have one back here.
What about the G-forces? Maybe more like 700.
Yes. So to get to 700 miles per hour, you would have to take a fair amount of time to actually accelerate to that safely for people to be a part of. Right now, the competition is restrained to a 1.2 kilometer long tube. So we only have so much space to hit the speeds that we want to. So we can experience a lot more high G-forces without putting any person in jeopardy. So like for this year, our system is looking at, for acceleration, about 1.5, 1.6 Gs, and then deceleration of about 3.6 Gs. So it's a pretty rough ride. Fortunately, nobody's going on it. Great question. Oh, you had one, yes.
How much will it cost for people to ride?
What would it cost? That's yet to be determined as well. It would probably, it would have to be something comparable to a train for it to be an effective form of transportation for this kind of thing, but I'm guessing it's going to be somewhere between that and what it costs to go on an aircraft.
When are you guys actually going to be done with building this?
Yeah, so we're in the design phase right now, and next semester we will be starting the build process for it.
How will the Hyperloop be able to stop?
How we'll be able to stop. So there's a bunch of different ways that you can stop. Our first pod, it stopped with magnets. There's a phenomenon when you run a passive magnet over a metallic plate that you actually can generate a magnetic drag force, which can help you stop. But this year's pod is going to be stopping with disc brakes, just like you would on a car. Good question.
So since this is a new technology, it somehow can affect humans as well, like is it healthy to get in?
Is it, what was that?
Healthy.
Healthy? Yes. Well, not in its current state because it hasn't been built to help or to hold people yet, because it's still so preliminarily in that design stage. But once it reaches the point where it will be able to take people, it'll be just like getting on a train or getting on a plane and going like that. You won't even notice that you're going up to 700 miles per hour on the ground.
Is it going to be more like, is there going to be like one for people or like one for products, like it's like from businesses?
Yeah. The initial thought was to do it for products first, test the technology, make sure it's going to work, and then start making it for people as well. So definitely being able to take advantage of it for both things so you get your products faster. Any other questions? We can always come back to, but we can keep moving with some other stuff as well. All right, if you have any more questions, hold them. And, well, don't hold them. If you have a question, feel free to interrupt me anytime during the presentation. But if it's specifically about this, we can always come back to it at the end. So now we're going to talk a little bit about, well, how do you do something like this? It's a pretty complicated project. What do you do to be successful at it? So the first thing is don't do it alone. You just can't do it alone. It's a very complicated project. You need people with a multitude of different specialties, all that good stuff. So I don't just mean, though, classmates. I mean classmates, colleagues, faculty advisors, teachers, professors, industry professionals, literally anybody that you can think of that would be helpful for your project, try to get them on board. This doesn't just apply to my project. It doesn't just apply to other people's projects. Anything you do, surrounding yourself with people that can help you do that is going to help make sure that you're successful. You had a question?
Yes, and you say you guys are working with who to help develop this type of technology?
So we're working internally as a team, but we're working with all different industry professionals to help us build our pod. And then SpaceX is the one hosting the competition. Yeah.
And is there like a prize for the winner or something?
So there's a trophy, but aside from that, there's no prize other than the satisfaction that you've built something incredible, which is, for me, good enough. So bringing it back to this, you're really only as strong as your team. It's directly proportional to your success. And in the words of the U of M football coach, Bo Schembechler, it's all about the team, the team, the team. The team succeeds, you succeed. So then more specifically, though, about the engineering process. How do you deal with something so complex, with so many moving parts? What do you do? So the first thing is to try to synthesize the problem. This is what we've done. This is what a lot of industry leaders do. You break it down. You take this big, complex system and you break it down into something that makes a little bit more sense in little bits and pieces. By doing that, you have to make sure that you're in line with what the goal of the competition is, or the goal that's being mandated by your customer, if you're in the industry. But then on top of that, on top of the goals that they have, like you need to hit a certain speed, for example. On top of that, you have your team's goals. What does your team want to accomplish? That doesn't always have to be technical. For example, with our team, we have 3 main goals. One is to build a pod, one is to get it in the tube, and another is to build the team. Since we're still such a young team, we are still working on building the team. We're trying to expose more people to what the project actually is on top of that. So that's one of our main driving goals. Once you have those in place, then you can start taking a look at the actual requirements. And now there are 2 different kinds of requirements. There are the requirements that are mandated by either your customer, if you're in the industry, or the competition itself. So for us, we have a whole big list of different requirements that we need to meet because SpaceX has a tube that we're going to be using, and we need to be able to work with their system. But then once you have that in place and you know that like the back of your hand, then you have to come up with what your system requirements are going to be for your specific system. And so what we did, for example, is we take all of the requirements that SpaceX has, and then we build upon that to make it related to our system. So everything that is a requirement for us feeds back to a key requirement mandated by SpaceX. So you try to break it down so that it's in line with what the company or the competition is requiring, then also to make sure that it's in line with what your team is trying to achieve. So then once you do that, then you get to start doing the really fun part, which is coming up with a preliminary design. Now, at this stage, it needs to stay really high level in the sense that you kind of have this idea of what you need to achieve. You kind of know that you're going to have a propulsion system, a braking system, some kind of electronics to make sure you control it, but you don't know exactly what it's going to look like. But by doing that, you can start to break it down into different sub-teams. So you can realize that, oh, you're going to need some people to work on a propulsion system and the braking and all those other things I mentioned before. And once you do that, then you can start to put people into those places. Now, that's a little bit of a tricky thing because you want to make sure that people are interested in what they're doing, but you also want to take advantage of the experience that those people have. So you have to try to balance that, but at the end of the day, if someone's not interested in what they're doing, they're probably not going to do as good of a job doing it, so make sure that that is on the forefront of your decision making. Then once you have those teams set up, then you can have those different sub-teams start working on populating your design space, doing research on just about any possibility that you could use for that. So if you're talking propulsion system, yeah.
I feel like it wouldn't touch the ground, so how would
Like in the pod?
Yeah.
So there would be docking stations where it would get fixed in place, is most likely what the infrastructure would look like. The only people that are actually working on that is the one company that's participating in this. But it would basically be like a transit center or a train stop where it would stop, it would get fixed in place, something would open up in the tube as well as in the pod, and people would step out and walk down some set of stairs, something like that. Yeah, good question. Okay. So you do all this kind of research, trying to gather everything that you could possibly think of that could be even remotely related to what you're trying to design. And then you start to synthesize that, cut it down, and do trade studies on these different possibilities. So for example, with propulsion, we were looking at cold gas propulsion, which was more like the air nozzle type deal, electric propulsion, and linear induction motors. So we did a trade study on those to try to decide what was going to be the best for our system. And the things that weigh into that are feasibility for your team. That was a huge one for us because we realized we're students. There's only so much that we can do, especially since we're taking classes at the same time as doing this. And so in the end, we actually decided to go with an electric motor, but I'm not going to talk too much about that specifically. So we did trade studies to make that decision. Then once you get that done, then you actually get to start the real work, which is the exciting part. But you could have the most incredible team put together, the most incredible ideas, all that good stuff. But if you do not have a good form of communication, good luck. You're probably not going to be as successful as you could. Communication is probably one of the most common sources of failure. So making sure that you come up with a system that's going to work for your team is very, very crucial. So there's a whole different slew of different things that you could use to maintain that communication, and oftentimes there's a combination of these that get used. So like email, instant messaging, in person. We use a lot of instant messaging because we're a very fast-paced team. We have a very tight deadline, so we need this quick feedback and allows for separated conversation. We can do that with Slack. Email is a common one that a lot of companies use. A lot of schools use it as well. But at the end of the day, the very most important one that you can try to use is the in-person. Nothing's ever going to beat in-person. You get to have a conversation. You can stop the person from in the middle of their explanation if you need clarity on something that they had just said. You can immediately have a follow-up question, get that interaction. In addition to that, work sessions, from our standpoint, is where all of the great work gets done. We get everybody together in the same room or the same couple of rooms, working on their respective parts. And as soon as they have a question about maybe how's this going to work with the other team or something like that, you can immediately go ask that question. You get that question answered, development can continue. So this topic here is a little bit near and dear to my heart because we did not do this very well the first competition. Be completely transparent, we were a team of 6 people that had broken off from what was open loop. And we were trying to do both the engineering as well as the management because we just didn't have the people. And this just does not work very well. And so we've made a lot of adjustments since then. And to do that, these are some of the things that we found most important and things you need to keep in mind when trying to set this up. First thing is that there are many, many different types of leadership or leadership styles. So trying to figure out who your leaders are and what types of leadership personalities they have is going to be really crucial because then you can use that to your advantage. So maybe someone's better at making sure that deadlines are met. Maybe make them the operations person to make sure that we're ordering things by the days that we need to, those kind of things. The person that brings people together most easily, maybe put them at the team lead position, for example. The next thing is being transparent. Transparency is really important as well. That's kind of 2 different things. One is making sure that you keep people in the loop in the sense of what's going on with the team, what is the leadership team working on, making sure you're transparent about your funds, about the state of the team, about how your relationship is with the university, with your different sponsors, that kind of thing. Making sure that everybody knows everything that's going on. And then the other one is more internal, making sure that everybody has an idea of what's happening with the team and all the other different sub-teams. As soon as there's that communication breakdown, that's when you can start to have a lot of the problems. The last thing on here is accountability, and this one I think is really, really important. You need to build a community or an environment where you build or your team has trust in the leadership. And a great way to do that is if for some reason you do make a mistake, even the small mistake, make sure that you own up to it. Because as soon as you own up to it, then the rest of the team is going to know, hey, okay, at least they recognize that they made a mistake, but that actually is going to build confidence in the leadership rather than hurt it in a lot of cases, which is kind of counterintuitive, but it's a really key thing to take a look at. The next is to be approachable for suggestions, in the sense that if you build an environment where where you stifle questions and people don't ask questions, they don't raise concerns, then things are going to get missed. And if things get missed, you don't get to compete. So building an environment where people feel comfortable talking, raising questions, saying maybe something could be done better a different way, those kinds of things is going to be really crucial to the success of your team. And I really love this quote, so I threw it up there. A boss says go, but a leader says let's go. So it's not just the leadership saying, all right, this is our project, you guys need to go do this work so we can actually achieve this. It's we're all working on this together. You're doing your part, we're doing our part, we're all in this together, the team, the team, the team, as Bo Schembechler said. So, talking about the team, this is the team that we have assembled for this year's competition. And like we talked about breaking it down into those different sub-teams, this is how we have structured ourselves. We have a leadership team that is responsible for the management of the team, making sure that the team is functioning to the best of its capabilities. So any kind of concerns or problems get dealt with by the leadership team. They also are responsible for maintaining contact with faculty advisors and things like that. Then we have our controls team. They're responsible for all things electricity. That's also including our software. So they do our batteries, our wire harness, and our software. We then have our propulsion system. Their sole responsibility is making sure that we have a system that can get up to the speeds that we want to. So they focus specifically on the electric motor. We then have a stability team, because even if we can hit those speeds, somehow we need to maintain our stability, because the track's not perfect. We need to make sure that we're not going to start vibrating and run off the track or something like that. So they make sure that we maintain that stability in all 6 degrees of freedom, roll, pitch, and yaw. Then we have our business team, which is really crucial, even though you might not think so, because at the end of the day, if we have a really awesome system, we put together this awesome pod that's definitely going to win the competition. If we can't build it, then we don't get to compete. We don't have that shot at winning. So this team takes care of making sure we have the funds to do it and make sure that we have the exposure to help get those funds and that people can follow the project and know what Hyperloop is all about and what our team is all about. Then it would be a real bummer if we could get to 300 miles per hour or something like that and then not be able to brake. So we have a team completely dedicated to making sure that we're going to brake, designing our brake system. And then we have our structures team, which is at the last here, but it's very much not the last thing on our minds. We need to make sure that everything can fit together, everything's connected, because if it's not, then you've got a motor and a set of brakes that don't do anything together. It's broken down like this, but it's very much of a collaborative system where there's constant flux between the different people or the different teams, because brakes needs to be able to stop in a certain amount of time, but that's dictated a little bit by what kinds of speeds we hit. There's all of this overlap. So that's why that communication is so important. Getting into those work sessions and being able to work together is really, really critical. So now moving away a little bit from that and talking more about the competition. This is a little bit of a timeline stretching all the way back from its beginning, which was in the summer of 2015 when Elon Musk had released this white paper about what Hyperloop could be and then announced that they would be hosting a competition. Then following that, in the winter of 2016, the OpenLoop team that was formed in that summer after he announced that went to Texas A&M for a design weekend to present what design they had at that current point. From there, the competition happened actually a year later, but in the fall of 2016, we decided that we were going to compete as our own team in the second competition, which had already been announced. So we finished up some work on the OpenLoop end. We had the actual pod with us in Ann Arbor in our project facility, so we're working on that. But then once that left, we started the transition into the Michigan Hyperloop team. Then we got through all these different design check phases, and we made it to the summer of 2017, where we continued with the build of our first competition pod, and final integration, as well as some preliminary testing, and then culminating with the competition in August of 2017, so just a couple months ago. Then once we got back to school in the fall, September-ish, we started recruiting new members because we wanted to build the team. That's been one of the 3 goals of our team. So we brought on a bunch of new people. We built our team up from between 10 to 20 people that we had for the first competition we competed in to now having between 30 and 40 very talented engineers all helping us get to the point that we're hoping to achieve. After that, we've been very heavily involved with the design process, and that's still we're still in that phase. And that's going to finish up here after Christmas time. And then we'll start the build phase with a couple different presentations built into there, which include some of these. So building starts again mid-January is what we're looking at, with a final design presentation being scheduled for later that month. So that's assuming that we make it through the next checkpoint, which is submitting our final design package to SpaceX for review. Once that happens, we're planning to finish build by the end of the semester, which for us is in April, and then start testing. So we'll have a small group of people, or smaller group of people, that will be in Ann Arbor over the summer that will get to do a lot of our small-scale testing. Unfortunately, we can't do a lot of testing with the whole system because we need the tube for that, and that's out in California. But we can do a lot of the smaller scale stuff, running our motor on a dyno to try to get the RPMs that we need to make sure that that's going to work the way we expect it to. And then we have a safety briefing built in there somewhere where we actually have to say to SpaceX, hey, we've identified that these are all the different possibilities of what might go wrong and how we could mitigate that to make sure that we don't hurt our pod, the tube, or people especially. And then the competition is set to be sometime in the summer of 2018. We don't have a specific time, which is a little bit difficult for us working towards it, but that's why we've set this more aggressive schedule, just to make sure that we can achieve that. So if you've been at all interested in what we've talked about today and are interested in learning a little bit more about what the pod is, specifically how it's going to work, please follow us on our journey through this competition. We will be having a design unveiling or a pod unveiling sometime next semester, so probably late February or somewhere around that time, once we get towards the end of the build phase, where we will be unveiling our pod. So if you're interested in seeing that, keep an eye out for it. You can follow us on Facebook, Instagram, all those good things, and we will be posting updates throughout the course of the design and starting to build. Also, if you know anybody that would be interested in helping us achieve these goals, we do have a crowdsourcing GoFundMe page for funds. It is a very expensive project, and we're working with corporate sponsors to try to achieve that goal, but anything helps. So if you're interested in doing that as well, or know anybody that would be, take a look at that. So with that, that concludes everything that I have specifically, but I would love to answer any kinds of questions that you might have. Anything at all. I have a couple stickers that I can give away. Michigan Hyperloop stickers.
You said you're going to have the build done in April.
Yes.
What is the scope of that build? Is it going to be just a track? Is it going to be the pod? What's going to be the scope of that build?
Great question. So the question was, what is going to be the scope of the build? We are only responsible for the actual pod. So we build the pod and we take it to California and we test it there. So it's involved, but it's not as involved because we don't have to develop the infrastructure. Good question.
So, as living in Michigan, do you think have any advantages than other tubes?
We have the name recognition of the university that helps a lot. When we reach out to different companies for funds and things like that, there's a good chance that someone that works at the company is going to have gone to U of M. So we get to play that card. For example, we reached out to Harman, the company Harman, and their vice president or something like that is a U of M grad. So they were very inclined to help us with achieving the funds we need.
Are there limits that you can't pass for like safety reasons?
Limits? Yes, more so just like a physical limit. We can only hit certain speeds because the technology for the motors or the different propulsion systems that we have that you would need to hit these kinds of speeds is limited by how much time you have to accelerate. And then since the tube is a fixed length, there are only certain metrics that you can actually hit. And then there are constraints that are imposed by SpaceX, like you have to be able to, or if you have anything dangerous, you need to make sure that that's identified. If you have magnets, you need to keep people a certain distance away, those kinds of things. In the back.
Exactly how would you keep the pressure in check?
The pressure in the tube? Yes, that is a difficult problem. That is not a problem we have to deal with. SpaceX is dealing with that. But since it is this 6-foot diameter steel tube that is 1.2 kilometers long, that takes a lot of work to actually make sure that pressure is maintained, and it takes a while to bring it down to pressure. So they're working on the infrastructure for the competition, but currently only about 3 teams actually get to compete on the day of competition. There's a whole week of testing that leads up to that week, and whoever does the best in those series of tests gets to compete on competition day, because it takes roughly about a half an hour or so to bring it down to pressure.
What team are you in?
What team?
Leadership or?
Yeah, great question. The question was, what part of the team am I a part of? Which sub-team? So I'm a part of the leadership team. I'm actually the project team lead, so I make sure that the whole team works properly. So I oversee everything. Any other questions, comments, thoughts, concerns, excitement? Yeah.
What is the goal for this to be ready?
What is the goal for what?
Like, what is the goal of the time? Like, what year do you think is going to be ready?
For people? That is a good question. For products, probably next 5 years or so. And then for people, I'm going to guess probably just 10 years. But that's very, very speculative. We could see a very quick spike in the technology that would help us do that. There is only one company actually working on it for people, though, right now. So it depends a little bit on their success. And then they can feed off of what we figure out from the competition.
Does friction play a role when you're going through the pod?
Yes, that is a huge part. That is part of why we actually have the tube. So by having the tube, we can bring down the pressure, which reduces aerodynamic drag, which is in a lot of cases due to friction, but other forces as well. And then with a lot of pods, there's some form of levitation. So with that levitation, you also reduce the friction from the ground and rolling resistance, which is also a friction-based thing. We unfortunately are on wheels, so we can't mitigate that, but we can still operate under vacuum.
Earlier you said that eventually 10, 20, however many years it takes to get this up and running to get a Hyperloop between New York and Orlando and such. You said that it would maybe cost per person about the same as it already does for a train or a plane ticket, which both are pretty expensive forms of travel. If there's already 2 ways to do it, is it really just because of time? The only reason why you would have this? Like, if it's the same price? Or is it, like, I'm kind of trying to say.
Yeah, I think
There's already 2 established things, why would we need a third?
Yes, that is a great question. And I would say that yes, it is mostly a time thing, but people often say time is money, especially in the business industry, making sure you can get to your appointments on time, you can spend less time in the transit, which is wasted time. And it reduces energy too. It's a much more energy efficient system, that's the goal at least, because you now have a shorter transit time, you have a lot less resistance, so the idea is that you can put in less energy to get the same kind of outcome. Last question. All right, last question. Saw your hand first.
The goal could also be to reduce pollution.
Yes, exactly. So if, for example, our system is an electric system, so as long as we find out a good way to generate that electricity that doesn't involve burning coal, like a lot of electric devices require, then we'll move more towards reducing fossil fuels. Yeah. Unfortunately, that's the last question. Thank you all so very much for listening to this, and I hope you're all very interested and will follow our journey.